Hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Atolagbe, and in this video I will show you how I made the corset top you just saw. This is definitely the 2020 take on corset tops. It's like one of the nice things that 2020 has given us. They exist in different colors and fabrics and sizes, but ultimately they all ooze the same vibe, and many of them tend to taper in that same way in the front. So this is a pattern drafting and a sewing tutorial on my own top. For the sake of correctness, I should mention that this is not exactly a corset. It's more a bustier. A corset would be more rigidly boned and fashioned to cinch in the waist. This is not, but you will definitely feel supported, firm, and put together in this top. At least that's how I feel. I feel like it's super cute, super gorgeous, and I'm going to just go out there and say that everyone should have a corset top. So for this video, we will need fabric, obviously. I'm going to use what is left of my 3 yards of fabric from my Carissa green leaf video, which I will have linked somewhere here, so that you can watch it. If you haven't, please do watch it. Also, we will need a basic bodice pattern. Speaking of patterns, I'm going to have mine downloadable in the description box, so that if you are in my size, you can totally make use of it and just use it to make your own corset tops. But if you're not in my size, you can still use it as a guide, I guess. But if you know how to grade patterns, you can grade my size into yours. But then if you can grade patterns, then you can definitely make the pattern. But, I will have my pattern in the description box. Make of that information what you will. We will also be needing boning, and we will need one body measurement, which is basically from the shoulder down to the under bust, which is just the point before the swelling of the breast. I hope you find this tutorial helpful and likable. If you do, please subscribe and like the video and watch my other videos. So let's start. Now I'm working with my basic bodice patterns as usual. First off, I'm going to measure the depth of my neckline. The depth I wanted as like a 5.5 inches, and then I used my pattern master to draw this neck like this. Moving on, I joined the 2 darts together like this. If yours are already joined, it's okay. So remember that shoulder to under bust measurement I talked about? This is where I just measured it from the shoulder to the under bust, and I drew a line to represent that. On my dart leg, I would measure about 0.8 centimeter on either side of the dart leg like this. And then I would draw a line connecting this point to the waist of the pattern. On here, I used my pattern master to draw a line, a curve that curves inwards. The goal here is to represent the natural curve of the breasts. So nothing was measured, I just drew a line that curved inwards, and also to ensure that I have the very same curve on the other end, on the other side, I folded it into like this, and I used my tracing wheel to transfer the curve I just drew to the other side. So after that, I'm just going to use my free hand and then my pattern master to trace out that curve, which must now reflect on the other side. Moving on to my neck, I measured 0.8 centimeters on either side of the shoulder dart legs. I drew another inward curve from the tip of the shoulder dart and extended it. This right here, this is the longer dart leg, and I'm going to extend that other dart leg, which is shorter. I'm going to extend it so that it becomes the same length as this, and I will draft the neck from there, a new neck. Okay, so now you would see me count the number of centimeters that this length is. I counted 7 centimeters, and I moved to the shorter dart leg and extended the curve to 7 centimeters and drafted a new neckline from there. Next up for me, I'm just going to extend the width of the dart at the waist to the end of the top. Next up for me is to measure 2.5 centimeters from that waist. This is where the side panel is going to end. I also use my pattern master to just draw a curve here. This can look however you want it to. This crossings represent the lines that no longer matter. I'm going to erase them so that I can make this even clearer. Drawing my grain lines. You may or may not notice, but I did that by aligning my pattern master with my cotton mat. That's a nice tip there. Okay, so now I would cut out the panels, and we would have panels for the front of our corset top. These are all 4 panels. The next thing for me to do is to add the seam allowances on paper. So for each of these panels, I would have 4 pieces, except for the center front, which would be 2 pieces cut on fold like this. I have 4 pieces of the other ones because I intended to make my lining with the very same fabric. So I would essentially have 2 tops looking alike, except that one is the outer top and one is the inner lining top. So I have joined as I just showed, and this is the outer top. It already has interfacing ironed to it, and I already pressed my seams. This is the lining also. It doesn't have interfacings. I thought to reinforce the outer layer because I felt like it. Now for my boning, I used Ridgeline boning that looks like this. It comes in various sizes really, and honestly, I'm not sure what size this is. They come in like 0.8 millimeters, 0.4, 0.6, 0.2. Although this is largely because I couldn't get my hands on spiral steel boning, which would have been ideal for this project, especially in the areas where there are curves. So if you have more significant curves than mine, you might want to go the route of spiral steel boning. The reason is that this boning only goes two ways, forward and backward. It doesn't go sideways. It doesn't bend sideways, and that can be difficult sometimes when there's a curve that wants to go sideways. But it's not all bad. Rigid boning is actually pretty nice, and the best part for me, I think, is the fact that you can totally go over this with a sewing machine. Like, you don't always have to use a casing. Although for this project I used a casing, but with projects where I'm working with something where the boning is in the lining of the dress and not on the outside, and I'm using rigid boning, I really mostly just go over with a sewing machine. It is that penetrable. For my boning casing, I cut 1.5-inch wide strips of fabric, several of them. I used my bias strip maker to make them into biases. Now I have my biases and pinning them to my seam allowances, just so that I have some structure around which to work. And eventually it looks like this. As you can see, I have one in each side panel as well, diagonally placed. So I had stitched them down. In order to decide the length of my bonings, I measured the length of the casings. In this case, there's a 13.5. In summary, for a 13.5 long casing, I cut a 12.5 long boning. I had rounded out the edges with fire, and now I'm putting masking tape, all to ensure that there is no poking of the wearer, in this case my humble self, and there is no poking of the fabric. Okay, now I am inserting my bonings, and as you can see, this was a struggle because apparently I made my casings too tight, but it was too late to go back, so I just struggled with it and I eventually got it in. That said, because of all of the struggles, I ended up really messing up my fabric. It had become quite dirty because I had held it very firmly for long hours with sweaty hands. I wanted to ensure that my zipper would be detachable. When I got this long zipper and I had to cut it, but I ensured that the bottom stopper was there. I wanted to make sure that my zipper was one that would help the top to come entirely apart. I would make a long straight stitch across the top of the stop. And I'm creating notches in there so that my curves can seat nicely, open nicely, and close nicely. This was the most spontaneous sleeve, but I love it so much. I cut 2 strips of fabric that were 1.5 inches wide each, and I made this semicircle thin, which I later measured, and I think it's about 6 inches across the radius. And I would create gathers in the straight edge. Okay, now I attached that to the strips of fabric and stitched. And then I had these accessories for sleeves. Okay, so now I inserted them into spaces that I had left while doing this before. I forgot to mention, but even if you didn't, you could just go on with a seam ripper and create some centimeters and then insert them. So I had inserted them and now we look like this. Next up for me is to understitch my upper neck part. I had understitched so that it bends nicely inside, and now it looks like this. I found these bra cups in an old top and I had stitched them to the top like this. Next up for me is to close this top and finish it up, which I would make stitches along these lengths, and from the space that I had left, I would turn the top inside out. Actually, after doing this, I went back into the top to get rid of the bulky seam allowances, but this video is not going to show that, so just know that I did that. Got rid of the bulky seam allowances and did this again. Okay, now that we're looking like this on the outside, the right side of the top, this part is a little hard to explain, but I just arranged these two such that they became right sides facing each other, and I sewed a straight line across on a sewing machine. I finished the sides that were left open with my hands, trying my possible best to ensure that the stitches were hidden. All of this I have done to try to hide my seams from the outside. And now we're looking like this. After I had finished this, I gave this top a nice wash and a nice press, and it became a clean and respectable top. As you can see, I really loved it.